Hydrocarbons have powered humanity for the past 150 years. The oil and gas industry operations account for 8% of all human-made greenhouse gas emissions, and it produces the fuels that cause another 33% of CO2 emissions.
California has decided to shut down oil production in an attempt to reduce these emissions. However, what are the socioeconomic consequences of this action? Has it caused an unintended increase in its global pollution footprint? Let's explore this.
The majority of global energy comes from hydrocarbons, and it's no different in California. Crude oil demand in California is inelastic, having remained relatively constant at around 600 million barrels per year. Even during the pandemic with a shutdown economy, it only dropped to around 490 million barrels per year.
The majority of crude oil used in California is imported from foreign countries, which have poor environmental practices and human rights abuses. 16.4% of California's imported oil in 2022 came from Saudi Arabia, where repeated human rights offenses with institutionalized homophobia and misogyny occur. Additionally, there's very high CO2 emissions and pollutions associated with their oil and gas industry.
Secondly, 16.9% of California's imported oil in 2022 came from Ecuador, where there's predatory loans from China are spurring on dirty oil production, which is leading to destruction of the Amazon rainforest, where there's minimum environmental regulations, indigenous land rights are being violated, and indigenous leaders are being killed in their opposition to this oil production.
In Iraq, where the majority of our foreign imports come from, they have very high CO2 emissions that are up around 169% since 1990. They rank number 2 in gas flaring more than half of the natural gas produced by their oil fields, which is leading to leukemia, environmental disruption, and water contamination.
Shutting down oil production in California in an attempt to reduce emissions has caused an unintended increase in its global CO2 and pollution footprint. Due to the declining share of in-state production, California has increased its importation of foreign oil. Unfortunately, these foreign oil sources have high CO2 footprints and pollute heavily, directly opposing the strict environmental stipulations for California's oil production. Thus, on a global scale, California is inadvertently supporting pollutive sources of energy as it attempts to transition into cleaner energy.
California boasts the world's strictest energy regulations. So why the heavy reliance on imported oil, which often bypasses these stringent standards? Local practices maintain high environmental standards, while imported oil regularly does not. California standards emphasize habitat protection, reduced air emissions, and secure waste disposal.
Now, since we're so reliant on oil, and we still will be in the future, it's not feasible to rapidly cease oil consumption. Stopping California production will result in an increase in imports from foreign nations, in addition to less revenue going to the state. For instance, last year, about $30 billion was sent to foreign producers. We would still need California's current level of oil production, even if oil consumption is reduced by a targeted 80%. So new technologies have shown to help reduce CO2 emissions per barrel for up to 80 to 90%.
So our group poses the question, how do you think Californian oil and gas companies should navigate the energy transition? We pose that as the global energy transition accelerates, upstream operators must modernize and shift their operating models to increase efficiency and reduce their negative environmental impact. Then comes the question, how should they proceed?
And to answer this, we propose that we can expand our integration of solar energy into oil field operations and increase R&D in geothermal energy technologies to increase clean oil and energy production in California. Overall, increasing the share of oil produced in California relative to foreign imports would reduce its emission and pollution footprint. Furthermore, implementing CCS technology would reduce upstream emissions in addition to midstream emissions for refineries and power plants.